Good afternoon on this Friday, the 23rd of December. This is a special 28storms.com video regarding the potential for cyclone development near the Bay of Bengal with an eventual track towards Sri Lanka or southern India. The main concern is this developing tropical low located toward the southeast of Sri Lanka, and the U.S. Joint Typhoon Warning Center is giving this system a low chance of development over the next 24 hours. Meanwhile, the latest tropical weather outlook from the India Meteorological Department is noting the very strong convection located to the southeast of Sri Lanka, but there is little to no mention of the possibility of tropical cyclone development. Also, you may recall the tropical cyclone that did impact Sri Lanka toward the final week of November, and their government was highly scrutinized for not providing enough warning. Fortunately, this time around, their latest bad weather warning is at least alerting the boaters over the possibility of winds picking up along with some rather significant shower activity as that low begins to inch closer toward the country. The only downside to their products is that they are not mentioning the possibility of a cyclone formation, nor has the cyclone page been updated since October of 2010. However, based on the most regional satellite animation alone, you can easily get the picture that this area is going to have to be monitored very closely for the threat of tropical cyclone development. As we turn on the latest water vapor animation, it looks as though we have a favorable upper level ridge beginning to advect out of Indonesia, spreading westward, which will allow the upper level winds to become gradually more favorable for development over the next few days. Meanwhile, the zoomed-in satellite animation already confirms that we have showers beginning to spread into Sri Lanka and even southern India. We can also make out some broad cyclonic spin within this convective cloud mass, but it will more than likely take at least 2 to 3 additional days for this low-pressure area to begin to congeal and form one primary low center. To elaborate even further, the most recent microwave satellite pass taken several hours ago did not reveal much in the way of any significant organization near the surface. But to the contrary, the ASCAT satellite pass did reveal that there was a very weak and broad surface circulation located well to the southeast of Sri Lanka, but we will more than likely see several of these before a more dominant low begins to form within the next 48 hours. As mentioned in the most recent tropical weather update from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, we are noticing that there is westerly flow from the equator streaming into this disturbed mass of weather, and we also have some fairly strong flow coming out of the northeast, and basically what this amounts to is a strengthening monsoon trough that is conducive for tropical cyclone formation. Meanwhile, the latest low-level vorticity product shows that we are seeing more vorticity over time on both sides of the equator, but of course we're more concerned about this feature as it begins to spread a little bit more toward the west-northwest, and the latest wind shear product shows that building ridge beginning to stem from Indonesia, and it is working its way westward, and this is also being confirmed by the forecast models. The system is going to stay with that upper level ridge at least to some extent as it continues off towards southern India, so this is a marginally favorable pattern for slow development up until landfall. Despite the northern hemisphere going into winter, the sea surface temperatures surrounding the Indian subcontinent are still definitely favorable for tropical cyclone development. Sea surface temperatures don't become unfavorable until we reach the coastline of Bangladesh, but that system is not forecast to make it that far north into the Bay of Bengal. But one factor that we also sometimes have to factor in is the tropical cyclone heat potential. And this basically tells us how deep that warm water is near the surface, how much does that really extend, and if the heat content is rather shallow, then a slower moving system can cause a lot of significant cold water upwelling, which brings the cooler water at the significant depths of the ocean, and it brings it upward, which then begins to weaken the tropical cyclone. But that's really more of a factor for systems that are not moving all that fast. But in this particular scenario, we don't really foresee a reason why this cyclone would begin to stall out in the Bay of Bengal. Instead, it should rather continue moving more toward the west-northwest, straight into Sri Lanka or southern India. So as we begin to review the latest dynamical model forecast, we're going to start off with the GFS wind shear forecast. And some of the lighter green colors that you see working their way into the Bay of Bengal are the favorable and light upper level winds associated with that upper level ridge. and this ridge is going to slowly move out of Indonesia and extend westward toward the Indian subcontinent. So this developing tropical low should at least have marginally favorable conditions up until the time it makes landfall. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at the latest 0Z run of the ECMWF model. And first and foremost, I have been monitoring the tropical cyclone models for any sign of development in the Indian Ocean region, and the European model was the last model to begin picking up the possibility of development from this low, but it most certainly is developing this system into a tropical cyclone within the next 72 to 96 hours. As we go into day 5, it appears that this is the time when the tropical cyclone is the strongest. Fortunately, the European is still not showing a very intense system, but nonetheless it's showing the storm moving just toward the north of Sri Lanka and eventually pushing due westward into lower India, and the main threats will be some gusty winds near the coastline, along with the possibility of some heavy rainfall wherever that center decides to track. We do have a little bit in the way of added confidence with regards to this forecast scenario due to the extreme model agreement that we are seeing between the ECMWF and the GFS. This may look like a carbon copy of the ECMWF run, but this is the GFS forecast by day 5, and this model has the storm in nearly the same position, located just north of Sri Lanka and about to make landfall in southern India. Additionally, this is the 8-day total precipitation forecast from the GFS, and this model is apparently showing quite a lot of rainfall along the track of this developing tropical cyclone, and we cannot rule out the possibility of some rather significant rains, especially if the center of the storm remains on a track that will take it very close to Sri Lanka. So the bottom line is that hopefully we don't get much in the way of significant rain, but it would be best to at least prepare for the possibility of some very significant rain with the possibility of flooding happening within the next week or so. So we've already seen the rather extreme agreement between the GFS and ECMWF models, and to elaborate or add on to that is the latest 5-day forecast from the Canadian CMC model. Sure enough, it has the tropical cyclone in the same exact location, just toward the north of Sri Lanka and pushing westward. And finally, the last thing I will show you in today's video is the ECMWF forecast for the middle half of the atmosphere, and this is what we call the 500 hectopascal level, and this is the layer in the atmosphere that will be the main dictator of where this tropical cyclone will move. And one of the things that you will not really see much in the way of is the presence of any significant troughs that will dip into India, which would ordinarily steer the system more northerly before perhaps moving into the Indian subcontinent. Instead, we see rather just the opposite, with more ridging coming across from the western Pacific and trying to nudge its way into Southeast Asia and eventually into the Bay of Bengal, which is going to help our system continue moving in a general west-northwest direction. So just to summarize, it is unlikely that we will see a tropical cyclone classification within the next 1 to 2 days, but over the next 5 days the overall potential is fairly high that we will get a tropical cyclone, and the main threats from this developing feature will be the risk of heavy rainfall, especially within the next 4 to 7 days, and the rainfall threat for Sri Lanka will greatly depend on whether or not that center tracks to the north of the island, or if it's close enough to where you would still get some heavy rain. And regardless, it looks as though that this system will be making a general track towards southern India, but we still have several days to monitor the storm's progress, so keep up with everything from us here at 28storms.com, and of course your more official information, that being the India Meteorological Department and the Sri Lankan Weather Department. So thanks again for stopping by. Stay tuned for more video updates.